Curtis Field has been a significant part of not only Falcon Heights' history, but its ties to state, regional, and national history. From the National Guard to the upgrade from the Air Corps to the United States Air Force to improvements in aerial technology. And we have a terrific event here today.
I am Melanie Leahy, Falcon Heights City Council, and a resident on this block where Curtis Field is. And it's so exciting that on the 100-year anniversary of the flight from the Airmen from this field all the way to Washington, D.C., launched the first National Guard. And this is a part of our Falcon Heights history. I lived right on Idaho when my husband and I first got married, so it was a pleasure to be invited and to include some of my neighbors that lived here on this block.
We're so excited to be here today at Curtis Field to be celebrating the 100-year anniversary of the Minnesota Air National Guard here in Falcon Heights. Some of us on council didn't even realize that we had such a great history, and we're so happy to partner with the Minnesota Air National Guard.
This is a terrific centralized gathering point for the city, located just off of Snelling Avenue. It's been here for many, many years and started out as a community informal playground and developed into a formal playground. You've got a lot of different people from a lot of different backgrounds coming together to make the community stronger, and we're just really, really glad to be here. We're grateful for the city of Falcon Heights and Public Works and everything they've done to put this together.
But it's important for us to remember our heroes of the past. And you know, one of the things I thought of, it's the 133rd Airlift. And then at one point they had Mall of America share as one of their partners for community togetherness. And in Psalm 133, it talks about how wonderful it is for brothers and sisters to come together in harmony. And in this hour, we need so many things to focus on harmony instead of disunity. And may this be a launch point for that as well.
We're here today to celebrate basically a century in the sky for the 109th Airlift Squadron. They started 100 years ago. They took off from this patch of land. It was called Curtis Airfield. And they took off on 26 September 1920 on a 7-day journey to Washington, D.C., Bowling Airfield, to meet with the Militia Bureau and the military leaders in Washington, D.C. to try to gain federal recognition to become the first federally recognized flying unit in the National Guard. When they made it there, they met with Billy Mitchell, who at the time was the Assistant Chief for the Air Service. And he's an Air Force legend, and he heard about their journey and their gigantic efforts to come out here and get recognized, which culminated in on January 17th, 1921, the 109th Observation Squadron becoming the first federally recognized flying unit in the National Guard. And we're just here to celebrate and have a flyover of a current C-130, which is part of the 109th Airlift Squadron. They're going to take off, or they're going to fly over at 11:50, which is exactly to the minute 100 years ago that they initially took off out of here, with Ray Miller, General Rhino, who was the Adjutant General for the state of Minnesota, and the Assistant Adjutant General, William T. Garris, Lieutenant Colonel. So it's a big day for all of us who've been part of the Minnesota Air National Guard for many years. And we're excited to celebrate 100 years of flying and look forward to hundreds of years more flying.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to today's ceremony. The men and women of the Minnesota Air National Guard and Army National Guard gather here this morning to commemorate a century in the sky. For your awareness, today's ceremony is being broadcast live through social media. Throughout the ceremony, you'll be given cues to stand or be seated at the appropriate times. As a reminder, during the playing of our national anthem, military members should stand at attention and render a hand salute, and civilian guests should place their right hand over their heart. The official party for today's ceremony include our host, Major General Sean Mankey, Minnesota Adjutant General. Our guest of honor and keynote speaker are Mr. Roy Furman, Chief Operating Officer of the Metropolitan Airports Commission, and Ms. Jill Renslow, Executive Vice President of Business Development and Marketing for Mall of America. Please join me in extending a very warm welcome to our guests and distinguished visitors in attendance today. the Honorable Tim Walz, Governor of Minnesota. Major General Retired David Hamler, former Assistant Adjutant General Air, Minnesota Air National Guard. Brigadier General Dan Gabrielli, Chief of Staff, Minnesota National Guard. Brigadier General Retired Joseph Kazak, former Assistant Adjutant General Air, Minnesota National Guard, and his wife, Joanne. Colonel James Cleet, Commander, 133rd Airlift Wing. Colonel Limond, Vice Commander, 133rd Airlift Wing. Colonel Andrew Berta, Commander, 133rd Maintenance Group, and his wife, Kate. And Miss Melanie Leahy and Mr. Mark Maizga, members of the Falcon Heights City Council. We would also like to extend a warm welcome to all former and current commanders, chiefs, and members of the Army and Air National Guard, and all others in attendance here today. Ladies and gentlemen, please stand for the entrance of the official party and musical honors, and remain standing. National anthem by members of the 3rd, 4th Infantry, followed by the invocation given Colonel Dan Hoyu.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we built at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the lands of the free and the home of the brave?
We stand on a place where this day a century ago, 3 forward-looking soldiers volunteered Minnesota's military to be near the center of the nation's defense beyond their foreseeable future. Just as Minnesota volunteers had served and sacrificed 60 years earlier during the Civil War at Gettysburg and other battles, today marks another 100 years of the same dedication to defending our nation and to bringing good into this world when faced with wars, natural disasters, and other troubles. They began their flight less than 2 decades after the Wright brothers first flew, and while we were fully engaged in the war that ravaged Europe. Wow. We're told in an ancient psalm, "The Lord is good, his steadfast love endures forever, and his faithfulness to all generations." I invite you to pray with me. Lord God of heaven and earth, of history and of the present and of the future, we are awed when we think of the favored place that we find ourselves. We've inherited a legacy of service and sacrifice. We live in a nation free. And once again, in 2020, we are poised to bring good into this world as we have since our inception. We're filled with wonder that you are present with our citizen warrior brethren. You were there 100 years ago and 160 years ago and beyond, and you're here with us today. We welcome your presence among us now. Cause us to remember and to celebrate well, so that we may fulfill your purposes in this world by carrying out our service as men and women committed to the highest and most noble values of this nation. In your holy name we pray. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Thank you to the 34th Infantry Division Band and Chaplain Poyu. Today marks the first in a sequence of celebrations commemorating the establishment of the 109th Observation Squadron, the descendant unit of today's 109th Airlift Squadron, and the 133rd Airlift Wing. The ceremony celebrates a historic moment as we dedicate a plaque to immortalize the brave acts of General Walter Renault, Lieutenant Colonel William Garris, and Captain Ray Miller, as they departed this airfield 100 years ago today, with a shared vision for the establishment of integrated air capability across the state of Minnesota and the nation. The plaque's placement represents a monumental accomplishment for the Air National Guard due to the forward thinking of these three men. This plaque also signifies a proud heritage and legacy of honorable service to the state of Minnesota and the Air National Guard. It is now my distinct pleasure to introduce to you the host and presiding officer for today's ceremony, the Adjutant General of the state of Minnesota, Major General Sean Mankey.
Good morning, Governor Walz, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, general officers, aviation enthusiasts, and members of the Minnesota National Guard 133rd and Minnesota National Guard. Welcome to this historic commemoration. In 1920, our nation had just endured World War I, and our brave service members had recently returned from success in Europe. Military units were beginning to reform at stateside locations and train in garrison. Aviation was in its infancy, and Curtis Field was the first and largest dedicated airfield with hangars in Minnesota. It was the beginning of what would become the barnstorming era. What a great time to be in aviation. And exactly 100 years ago, three bold and brave Minnesota National Guard pioneers departed from this location, Curtis Field, in a rented Curtis Oriole, on a daring and courageous journey to Washington, D.C. No GPS, no iPad, just a compass, and I would imagine a lucky rabbit's foot or something of that nature with them. The Oriole cruised along, probably not comfortably, but at the breathtaking speed of 60 miles. If you were daring, you could nose it over and get it up to its maximum speed of 75 miles per hour. The pilot, Captain Ray S. Miller, was instrumental in this venture and would later become known as the father of the Minnesota Air National Guard. The 109th Observation Squadron, as it was originally designated, was an auxiliary unit of the 34th Infantry Division, Red Bulls. Now the 109th Squadron is part of the 133rd Airlift Wing. But then and today, the 109th and the 34th Infantry Division were known and are known nationwide as exceptional units. Their professionalism and superb performance are second to none. In 1939, the 109th realized the need for a squadron insignia. They called on their service members in the unit to create a symbol to paint on the unit's aircraft, one which represented the values, heritage, and spirit of the unit in the great state of Minnesota. Later that year, the 109th Arrowhead Insignia was selected and approved. The patch is to my left, your right, and the tip would always point to the north, or point up. The colors ultramarine blue and golden orange come from the Army Air Corps' lineage. The golden rays represent the Aureola Borealis, These rays numbered 34 to signify the assignment to the 34th Infantry Division. The arrowhead is still used today and worn on the right shoulder of the airmen of the 109th. During the post-World War II years, the 109th was assigned to the 133rd Wing and temporarily trained at modern-day Holman Field in downtown St. Paul. The unit constructed the headquarters building where the 109th Arrowhead crest was permanently etched in the concrete over the front entrance. Today, this building is home to the 34th Expeditionary Combat Aviation Brigade of the 34th Infantry Division, the Army National Guard's unit which operates Black Hawk helicopters out of this facility. The 109th Arrowhead remains over the main entrance as a reminder of the close association between the 34th Infantry Division and the Air Guard units. For over 100 years, Army and Air components of the Minnesota National Guard have extensively trained at Camp Ripley near Little Falls, Minnesota. The 109th Observation Squadron began conducting regular summer encampments at Camp Ripley in the 1920s and 1930s. Camp Ripley was and still is a premier military training center that provides training opportunities for both ground and the air. When the old airstrip was updated to a fully functional airport, it was appropriately named Ray S. Miller Army Airfield to honor the father of Minnesota Air National Guard Aviation. Just as General Renya, the Minnesota Adjutant General in 1920, was aboard the first flight 100 years ago today, I am honored and humbled to join in remembering this historic event and will continue a century in the sky by enabling the 133rd Airlift Wing to remain ready and relevant. Always ready. Thank you.
Thank you, Major General Mankey. It is now my distinct pleasure to introduce our guest presenter for today's event, Brigadier General Dan Gabrielli, Minnesota Air National Guard Chief of Staff.
Thank you. I'm going to tell you a good story today. It's about three fellas with a lot of gumption and a rented Curtiss Oriole aircraft, but it's so much more than that. It's about the start of a magnificent flying unit originally named the 109th Observation Squadron. The three men were Brigadier General Walter Rhino, the Adjutant General, Lieutenant Colonel William Garris, the Assistant Adjutant General, and Captain Ray Miller, a pilot recently discharged from the Army Air Service, who was then Chief Pilot for the Curtiss Northwest Company. They were supposed to depart at 11 a.m. on this date 100 years ago from this patch of land, which was known as Curtiss Field, which extended far to the south. In fact, my childhood home is 3 blocks from here. Because of all the fanfare with the photographers, or torture, as Lieutenant Colonel Garris put it, they didn't depart until 11:50. The trio of men wanted more than an air auxiliary unit status and soon made plans to show the effectiveness of an air unit within the framework of the National Guard by renting a Curtiss Oriole biplane and flying from St. Paul to Washington, D.C. The journey, which was the first step in that process, began 100 years ago today, September 26, 1920, right here. Day one, they flew from here down the Mississippi to La Crosse, Wisconsin. There they landed and met the mayor and some 300 citizens and were escorted to a large banquet which they could not escape for 4 hours. They finally departed and wanted to make it to Chicago, but it was dark and they encountered a blinding rainstorm and when approaching Madison, so they stopped there for the night. The Adjutant General of Wisconsin came and met with General Rhino, so Miller and Garris decided to take in a picture show. The money was wasted, however. They were soon fast asleep and not disturbed until requested to move at the closure of the theater. Day two, they got out of Madison early and with favorable winds reached Chicago in a remarkably short time. Their stay in Chicago was just long enough to take on gas, and that evening they reached Van Wert, Ohio, landing just across the road from the home of Captain Miller's parents. The Miller household had prepared a most excellent chicken dinner, and we partook of all the 57 varieties which go to make up a real home meal, according to the crew. Day three, they took off for Cleveland and landed on the field of the Martin Bomber Company at about noon. Some of the factory workers came out to look over the aircraft and visit with them and made such encouraging remarks as this: The last Oriole passing through Cleveland crashed on this field and killed 3 people. These comments did not disturb the aviators in the least. They were delayed getting out of Cleveland with a bit of motor trouble, which ended up being a bad spark plug. By dark, they were in Buffalo, New York, and the Adjutant General, being tired, went to bed early, but Miller and Garris, following their usual custom, went to a picture show and again, as was their habit, fell asleep. Day 4, they set out for Buffalo with the goal of reaching New York City by dark. About 30 miles from Albany, they found themselves low on fuel and decided to land at Amsterdam Field. They took off in the afternoon for New York City, but 75 miles north of the city, it became dark. So they landed in Poughkeepsie and stayed the night. Due to heavy rains the next morning, it was obvious that they would not fly that day. It was at this point that General Rhino, the Adjutant General, decided to abandon the crew. I know you'd never do that, sir. And he took a train from Poughkeepsie to Washington to await the arrival of the Oriole and crew there. Day 6. 2 days later, they left Poughkeepsie and with a very low ceiling and fog down the Hudson, landed at Garden City, Long Island. They inquired about a hotel and were directed to the Garden City Hotel, which they quickly saw upon arrival was a bit above their means and social status. In the words of Garris, it was a grand mistake, however, for it came to us quite forcibly that we were in the wrong pew. We were not at home among the 400. We were amused with the situation, however, and spent the night there. Day 7 and final day of the Oriole journey. Bucking a strong headwind, Miller and Garris completed a 3-hour, 40-minute flight from Garden City to Washington, D.C., and landed at Bowling Field. There they met an Air Corps and Air Force legend who was sympathetic to the fledgling cause of air power, General Billy Mitchell, who at the time was the Assistant Chief of the Air Service. Upon hearing of their tremendous effort and journey, he pledged his support. The 3 days spent in Washington were crowded with numerous official engagements to the Militia Bureau and the offices of the Air Service, during which the trio, with the help of General Mitchell, enthusiastically sold the concept of an Air National Guard to military leaders throughout Washington. As a result of their efforts, the units received federal recognition on January 17, 1921. Some technical milestone. The history of aviation was made when the 109th Airplane broadcast the first aviation air-to-ground broadcast to KSTP and all the listeners around. Some 109th history. The 109th entered World War II in 1942, and while awaiting the arrival of their P-51 Mustangs, they sent a few pilots at a time to fly Spitfires with the RAF. They received their Mustang reconnaissance fighters in 1943. Their missions consisted of several different types: weather reconnaissance, aero reconnaissance, and fighter-bomber sweeps. At this point, I'd like you to point out that behind me, to the west, you will see an aircraft approaching. Just as the Curtiss Oriole departed heading east at 11:50 a.m. in 1920, piloted by their first squadron commander, Ray Miller, the current C-130 Hercules, piloted today by the unit's first female squadron commander, Lieutenant Colonel Dana Novinsky, exactly 100 years later. She's accompanied by her crewmates, Major Jeremy Maxey, Captain Matt Maleka, Technical Sergeant Ron Burns, Technical Sergeant Ron Christopher Todd, and Staff Sergeant Chase Tozer. And now the Minnesota Air National Guard can officially celebrate a century in the sky. I'm going to summarize a little more the history of the 109th before I finish here, because I think it's important. They flew in D-Day operations and in the Battle of the Bulge. The highly decorated 109th Tactical Reconnaissance Squadron flew 680 combat missions during World War II. They lost 7 airmen killed in action during the war. The 109th took on a global airlift mission in 1960 with the conversion to the C-97 aircraft, and was activated and participated in the Berlin airlift of 1961. The 109th was one of the first Air National Guard units activated for the conflict in the Balkans in 1999. Based out of Ramstein, Germany, they participated in Operation Shining Hope, flying missions into Albania, carrying relief supplies for refugees from Kosovo. A 109th Airlift Squadron C-130 was airborne on a routine guard mission from Andrews Air Force Base to Minneapolis on 9/11 and was witness to two of the airline crashes on that fateful morning, those being at the Pentagon and Shanksville, Pennsylvania. In fact, ours was the only military aircraft to visually witness any of the four events that day. 9/11 was a watershed event for the Air National Guard, as it was thrust from a strategic reserve role to that of an operational force. And the 109th has maintained a robust deployment operations tempo ever since, deploying to Afghanistan numerous times, as well as multiple other Southwest Asia locations. This is their new normal, and they embrace this role and thrive as a premier operational unit, consistently performing at the highest levels of mission capability and sortie generation and completion rates, which never fail to astound the total force leadership at the deployed locations. It's worth noting that even though 100 years seems a long time, this past April, we lost another giant of the Minnesota Air National Guard, who was Ray Miller's direct successor as commander of the 133rd Airlift Wing, as well as a former 109th commander. General John Dolney was age 99 when he passed away and was keenly aware of and enthusiastically looking forward to the centennial celebration. And he was just less than a month younger than the squadron itself. Installing this commemoration at Curtis Field completes the circle, as we have installed a plaque commemorating the historic flight on Bolling Air Force Base in 2018. I will end with the great words from a great man, General Ray Miller, which are as pertinent today as they were when spoken. If a change in mission comes along, and it did many times in the old outfit, as I'm sure it will again in the future, accept it as a challenge, make the best of it, and every time it will turn out for the best. Be the good soldier, obey your orders, know your job, speak well of the outfit, and think to the future, not of the past. Thanks for being here and for being part of a very, very meaningful day for the 109th Airlift Squadron, the Minnesota Air National Guard, and the greater Minnesota National Guard. Thank you.
Thank you, General Gabrielli. It is now my privilege to introduce to you our guest of honor and keynote speaker for today's ceremony, Mr. Roy Furman, Chief Operating Officer of the Metropolitan Airports Commission.
Good morning. What a fantastic way to celebrate today. On behalf of Rick King, our chairman of our commission, Brian Ricks, our CEO, it's an honor to be with you today, our distinguished guest. Governor Walz, Major General Mankey, General Gabrielli, general officers, airmen, soldiers, council members, and all of you, distinguished guests, welcome to this historic occasion. Today, we remember a time a century ago in the very early days of aviation when 3 members of the Infantry Division, 34th Infantry Division, flew from here, Curtis Field, to Washington, D.C. via way of New York to lobby for the formation of a flying squadron. It was a flight that, by today's standards, would really think of as brief, maybe routine, and perhaps even unremarkable, with just enough time for food and maybe a beverage service along the way. However, in 1920, as we just heard, it took well over a week, or about a week to do, with a few airfields to which to stop for fuel and little maintenance along the way. Their flight was far more from a testament about what aviation is and the infrastructure that has been constructed in the last 100 years. It was, in short, at that time, historic. That flight and the ensuing lobbying effort by those on board ultimately led to the Minnesota having the first Air National Guard unit in the nation in the 109th Observation Squadron. That squadron and its successor, the 109th Airlift Squadron, have continued to provide key support to the active duty Air Force and to the people in the communities of Minnesota for over 100 years. That flight also did something many people aren't aware of. It helped establish the site that would become a major cornerstone for aviation activities in the Twin Cities in the upper Midwest region. Again, let's go back 100 years. This time, not to Curtis Field, but to the site of the failed auto racetrack in Minneapolis. The squadron, created by the efforts of those three adventurers from the 34th Infantry, helped transform that failed auto racetrack in Minneapolis into a successful airfield. One that in 1923 was renamed after two local pilots who gave their lives in combat during World War I, Ernest Wold and Cyrus Chamberlain. Military activity and resources on the airfield helped spur the development of broader aviation use of Wold Chamberlain Field, including in 1926 by a startup company called Northwest Airways. That airline initially used the facility to deliver U.S. mail from the Twin Cities area to Chicago. And then after World War II, commercial aviation really began to change and take on more presence. Northwest Airways and other emerging airlines intensified their efforts to carry paying passengers from the state of Minnesota domestically around our nation and also to the world. Locally, those efforts were primarily focused on World Chamberlain Field, which had become a successful airfield in large part due to the activities of the 109th Squadron. In that way, the 109th helped establish the location of what is now the Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport. Keep in mind, the Metropolitan Airports Commission, which now owns and operates MSP, as well as 6 other reliever airports, was not formed by the legislature until 1943. The 109th had already been operating in the site for more than 2 decades, becoming the longest occupant of the airfield and our best tenant. The National Guard and the MAC remain closely connected by history, by service, by shared interest, and by joint use of the MSP airfield. While many people think of MSP as a regional air transportation hub and a key economic asset, which it is, it also remains a significant site for operations of Minnesota's National Guard. I'm honored to be here today to celebrate with our partners, Minnesota's Air National Guard, the brave actions that led to their establishment and indirectly to the siting of the Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport. It's one of the largest locations within the 5-state area. As someone with more than 2 decades of service in another branch of the National Guard, I can tell you firsthand how important the Minnesota National Guard is, how important their work is to this state, to this country, and to the world. The 109th Airlift Squadron and the 133rd Airlift Wing are vital partners with the Metropolitan Airports Commission and important military assets for our state and nation. I want to congratulate them for a century of incredible service that started with 3 brave aviators who cared enough to take what at that time was a long, dangerous flight to serve the long-term best interest of their state and this nation. I look forward to their continued partnership with the 109th, the 133rd Airlift Wing in the years and decades to come. Congratulations on a historic anniversary. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Furman. While today's event commemorates a historical event for the 133rd Airlift Wing, it is also the pilot event for a year of celebrations focused on bringing our community together and the relationships the wing has cultivated with civilian employers, suppliers, and community organizations. Today, we are pleased to announce that we have a key partner for the Centennial Celebration, Mall of America. To introduce this partnership, I now invite to the stage Ms. Jill Renslow, Executive Vice President, Mall of America.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, Governor Walz, and our host today. At Mall of America, we have an ongoing support with Beyond Yellow Ribbon, as well as other military and veteran initiatives, which would be reason alone for us to be involved with this once-in-a-century commemoration. So would our commitment to contribute dollars and resources to our community every day. But there's yet another reason for us to be a strategic partner in this centennial. Since 1992, Mall of America has been driven by innovation and inspired by new horizons. The extraordinary story of the birth of the Citizen Airmen in this Untitled Chapter in Minnesota's great innovation legacy. When Captain Miller became the commander of the 109th Observation Squadron, not only did he lead the squadron with distinction, but he also became an advocate for essential aviation infrastructure that would help fuel Minnesota's economy. In his work, he actively partnered with businesses in Minnesota to apply technologies in innovative ways. He was a visionary who was led with imagination and grit. As we seek to reinvigorate our economy and strengthen our communities, we would do well to model the imagination, grit, and optimism it took to make Minnesota home to the first federally recognized Air Guard unit in the nation. In 2021, Mall of America will host a celebration in June that leads into the exciting open house and Air Expo at the 133rd base next July. We will also be inviting the business community to pay tribute to our citizen airmen and women and help support dynamic experiences for families, veterans, students, and educators to celebrate a century of innovation. It is an honor to be here today, exactly 100 years after the bold dream took flight. And it's a privilege to help bring our community together in tribute and celebration during the coming year. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Renzel. If you could remain on stage, I'll now ask Mr. Furman to come back to the stage and invite to the stage Colonel James Cleet, commander of the 133rd Airlift Wing, who will present to you both a token of our appreciation. At this time, I'd like to ask Major General Mankey to please come forward and join Colonel Cleet for unveiling the plaque. The inscription on the plaque highlights the story you have just heard and states, quote, dedicated on the 100th anniversary of the first flight by the 133rd Airlift Wing in recognition of a century in the sky. The plaque was donated by the Minnesota Air National Guard Historical Foundation in appreciation to all the airmen, past and present, serving the Minnesota Air National Guard. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for today's commemoration. We would also like to extend a special thank you to the Minnesota Air National Guard Historical Foundation, the City of Falcon Heights, and the Metropolitan Airports Commission, and the Mall of America for your collaboration and support of this event. We'd also like to thank Chaplain Poyu, the 34th Infantry Band, the 133rd Airlift Wing for making today's event possible. Following the conclusion to today's ceremony, please feel free to stop by the hospitality tents before you exit the park and help yourself to some refreshments. Please stand for the playing of the Air Force song and the departure of the official party. This concludes today's ceremony. Thank you for attending, and we wish you a pleasant day.